The first snow came sideways. It did not fall gently from the sky like something beautiful. It came as a warning. The wind drove it hard across the flat Wyoming basin, slamming against the half-broken fence posts and the abandoned farm equipment rusting in the field. By morning, the small wooden shack at the edge of the property was buried halfway up its warped door. Inside that shack, Hannah Whitaker stood in 3 layers of coats, watching her breath turn white in the air. The thermometer nailed beside the window read 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside. She pressed her hands together and blew into them. "Not this winter," she whispered to herself. Last winter had nearly killed her. The roof had leaked. The stove had smoked more than it burned. She had slept wrapped in blankets with her boots on and still woken up shaking so hard her teeth felt loose. When spring finally arrived, she had sworn she would never let herself endure that kind of cold again. But money was thin. After her husband died in a highway accident 3 years ago, the bank had taken most of the ranch. What remained was 20 acres of stubborn land and whatever she could build with her own hands. Most people in town assumed she would leave, sell what little was left and move south. Hannah stayed. In late summer, she had driven 2 hours to a government surplus yard after hearing a rumor about old Quonset hut frames for sale. The yard smelled of oil and sun-baked steel. Curved metal ribs lay stacked like giant skeletons waiting for life again. "You planning on starting a war?" the yard manager joked when he saw her examining the steel arches. "Planning on surviving winter," she replied. The man laughed until he realized she wasn't joking. A Quonset hut wasn't pretty. It was half a cylinder made of corrugated steel, designed during wartime for speed and durability. But Hannah saw something else: strength against wind, fewer corners for snow to gather, and metal she could insulate better than the drafty wooden shack. She bought the frame with nearly every dollar she had left. By early fall, the ribs were bolted together on her land. The curved structure rose from the dirt like a silver wave frozen mid-crest. Neighbors slowed their trucks to stare. Some shook their heads. "She thinks she's an engineer now," one man muttered at the feed store. Hannah didn't argue. She just kept building. The first chimney idea came to her at night. She sat in the shack with a notebook, sketching by lantern light. A single stove had never been enough. Heat rose, gathered near the curved ceiling, then escaped through weak insulation. The cold settled low where she actually lived. "What if I trap it?" she murmured. Most Quonset huts used one central stove. Hannah planned 2 wood stoves, one at each end. But not just that. She would run both chimneys upward along the curve before exiting near the top center. The rising heat from both flues would warm the highest point of the structure, forcing warm air to circulate downward instead of escaping. She wasn't guessing. She spent nights reading old library books on airflow, studying how barns retained warmth, how smoke moved, how draft pressure worked. She borrowed a thermometer set from the school science teacher in town. By October, the steel skin was secured. She lined the inside with rigid foam insulation scavenged from a construction site dumpster, with permission, though the foreman had looked amused by her determination. Over that, she installed plywood panels to create a second interior wall, leaving a gap for trapped air. Air, she learned, was as valuable as wood. The floor was next. She dug down 6 inches and laid gravel for drainage. Over that, she installed thick rubber mats she found at an auction. Then a wooden platform floor on top, with straw packed beneath for added insulation. Her hands blistered, her shoulders ached constantly, but every bolt tightened felt like defiance. By the first heavy frost, the hut stood complete from the outside. Inside, it smelled of fresh wood and steel. The curved ceiling arched overhead like the inside of a whale. It felt smaller than a house, but stronger. The first stove went in on the east end, the second on the west. She installed heat shields behind both, cutting scrap metal into panels to protect the walls. The chimneys were the hardest part. Running them along the curve meant precise angles. One mistake and smoke would backflow. On the final day of installation, her neighbor Carl stopped by, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. "You really think 2 stoves won't just burn twice the wood?" he asked skeptically. "Not if the heat stays," she replied without looking up. Carl watched her climb the ladder and secure the final chimney brace. "You're stubborn, Hannah. Survival looks like stubbornness from the outside." By November, the snow returned. This time it piled against the curved walls and slid harmlessly to the ground instead of collecting on a roof. Wind screamed across the brace, planes, but the hut barely shuddered. The real test came the night temperatures dropped below zero. Hannah lit the first stove at dusk. Flames caught quickly, licking through split pine logs. She waited until the metal chimney grew warm before lighting the second. Slowly, heat began to build. She placed thermometers at 3 heights: floor level, chest level, and near the ceiling curve. Then she waited. Outside temperature, -6 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside after 1 hour, 28 degrees Fahrenheit at chest height. 2 hours, 41 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 hours, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. But what mattered most was the floor reading: 46 degrees Fahrenheit. She stared at the numbers, hardly believing them. In the shack last winter, she had never reached 40 degrees Fahrenheit without standing directly beside the stove, and the floor had always been near freezing. She adjusted the airflow dampers on both chimneys, experimenting. The curved routing forced the hot exhaust to travel longer before escaping, heating the upper air pocket. The insulation trapped it. The 2 heat sources balanced each other, eliminating cold corners. By midnight, the thermometer read 64 degrees Fahrenheit inside. She removed 1 coat, then another. For the first time in years, she slept without gloves. Morning sunlight filtered through the small front window. Frost coated the outside of the metal walls, glittering like crushed diamonds. Inside, the air felt steady, warm, not suffocating, not smoky, just livable. She checked the thermometer again, 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, -10 degrees Fahrenheit, a difference of nearly 68 degrees from outdoors, and 38 degrees warmer than her old shack ever managed in similar cold. Hannah let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since summer. Weeks passed. Snowstorms came and went. Each time she adjusted airflow, refined wood usage, tracked temperature changes in her notebook. She learned that burning hardwood at night maintained coals longer. She learned that cracking one vent slightly prevented condensation from freezing inside the insulation layer. The hut became not just shelter, but experiment. By January, word spread. Carl returned one afternoon with 2 other neighbors. "Mind if we see it?" he asked. She opened the door. Warm air spilled out into the freezing day. The men stepped inside and immediately removed their hats. "Feels like a different world," one muttered. Hannah showed them the double wall system, the chimney routing, the floor layering. She explained draft pressure and thermal circulation with quiet confidence. Carl ran a hand along the curved interior wall. "You built this alone?" She nodded. That night after they left, the wind howled louder than ever. Snow slammed sideways against the metal shell. But inside, the stoves glowed steady and orange. Hannah sat at her small wooden table, sipping coffee in a sweater instead of a parka. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt something stronger than grief. She felt capable. Outside, across the frozen field, headlights appeared where no road officially ran. She stood slowly, watching as a dark truck rolled to a stop near her property line. The engine idled, exhaust rising in white clouds. At this hour, in this weather, visitors did not come by accident. The driver's door opened. Hannah didn't move at first. She stood just inside the curved doorway of the Quonset hut, the warm air brushing against her back while the Wyoming wind clawed at the metal exterior. The truck's headlights cut pale tunnels through the blowing snow. Whoever had arrived had chosen the worst night of the month to do it. That meant it wasn't casual. A tall figure stepped down from the cab, boots crunching into the crusted snow. He pulled his coat tighter against the wind and shut the door with a heavy slam. The engine continued to idle. Hannah reached for the rifle mounted beside the door, not raising it, just resting her hand near it. Living alone taught her caution before kindness. The man took a few careful steps forward, squinting toward the hut. When he saw her silhouette framed by warm light, he lifted one gloved hand slowly. "I don't mean trouble," he called over the wind. His voice carried steady but strained by cold. "Most folks who say that usually do," Hannah replied calmly. He stopped walking, respecting the distance between them. Snow swirled around his boots. "Name's Deputy Mark Ellison," he said. "County Sheriff's Office." Hannah studied him. The badge pinned to his coat caught a flicker of light from her doorway. He didn't look like a thief. He looked exhausted. "What brings law out here in a storm?" she asked. He exhaled visibly. "We've got a situation about 12 miles west. Family stranded. Their furnace died 2 nights ago. Power lines down. We're moving them to temporary shelter, but the community center's generator gave out an hour ago." She didn't speak. "We heard," he continued, "that you built something out here that stays warm." Of course they heard. Small towns never kept secrets long. "And?" she prompted. "And I'm asking if you'd consider taking them in. Just for the night. Maybe 2. It's a mother and her little boy." The wind howled harder, as if pushing the decision at her back. Hannah looked over her shoulder at the glowing stoves inside the hut. The thermometers on the wall read 61 degrees Fahrenheit at chest height. Steady. The wood supplies she'd stacked along the back wall was enough for weeks if rationed carefully. "How old is the boy?" she asked. 6. 6. Last winter she had nearly frozen at 34. A 6-year-old wouldn't last long in single digits without heat. "Bring them," she said. Relief washed across the deputy's face so quickly it almost looked painful. He jogged back to the truck and opened the passenger door. A woman climbed out slowly, clutching a small bundled figure wrapped in blankets. The boy's nose was red from cold, eyes wide and silent. Hannah stepped fully outside now, guiding them quickly toward the hut. The warmth hit their faces instantly when they crossed the threshold. The woman nearly sagged in gratitude. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's warm." The boy blinked up at the curved ceiling. "Is this a spaceship?" he asked faintly. Hannah almost smiled. "Something like that." She helped them settle near the east stove where heat was strongest. The deputy followed, stamping snow from his boots. He looked around slowly, clearly impressed. "You really built this yourself?" he asked. "Yes." He ran a hand near the curved interior wall without touching it. "Feels solid." "It is." Hannah poured hot water into tin cups and added coffee grounds for the woman, sugar water for the boy. Color began returning to their faces within minutes. The mother introduced herself as Rachel. Her voice trembled from more than just cold. "Our landlord kept saying he'd fix the furnace," Rachel said quietly. Then the pipes froze. The deputy cleared his throat. "We're doing what we can." Hannah nodded once. "They can stay as long as needed." Deputy Ellison hesitated. "There's more." She looked at him sharply. "3 other homes are struggling," he admitted. "Not as bad yet, but if this cold snap holds..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Hannah turned her eyes toward the thermometers again. 63 degrees Fahrenheit now. The dual stoves were holding strong. She had built for efficiency, not luxury. "How many total?" she asked. 8 people, maybe 10. The hut wasn't huge, but it was insulated. Circulation worked best when interior space wasn't too open. Bodies themselves created heat. She walked to the center of the curved room, thinking through airflow patterns. If she positioned bedding along the interior walls and kept the center open, circulation would continue uninterrupted. The twin chimneys would still force warm air downward. "I'll need more wood," she said finally. The deputy straightened. "We can haul it." "And no one opens both doors at once," she added firmly. "Heat escapes fast." Rachel nodded quickly. Within 2 hours, the truck returned with another family, then another. Snow kept falling. The hut slowly filled with people shedding coats, stamping boots, staring in disbelief at the warmth contained within curved steel walls. By midnight, 11 people occupied the space. Blankets lined the insulated floor. The thermometers dipped briefly to 56 degrees Fahrenheit during door openings, but climbed again as the stoves worked harder. Hannah adjusted dampers with precision, controlling draft like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Deputy Ellison watched her closely. "You ever considered teaching this?" he asked quietly. "Teaching what?" "How to build something like this." She looked around at the quiet scene. Children asleep under quilts, adults sipping warm drinks, frost glazing harmlessly over the outside of the hut, while inside felt steady and safe. "I built it so I wouldn't freeze," she said. "Looks like you built more than that." The cold snap lasted 9 days. During that time, Hannah's Quonset hut became unofficial shelter for half the struggling families in the basin. Word spread beyond the county. A reporter from Cheyenne drove out once roads cleared enough to pass. She photographed the curved structure against white plains and asked endless questions about insulation thickness and chimney angles. Hannah answered plainly, no exaggeration, just facts. 2 stoves create balanced heat zones, she explained. Running the flues along the arc increases thermal transfer before exhaust. Double wall insulation traps air. Raised floor prevents ground freeze-through. The article ran a week later with a headline about a woman who engineered her own survival. Calls began coming from neighboring towns asking for plans. By late February, when temperatures finally climbed above freezing for more than a day, the community center had power restored. Families returned home gradually. Rachel hugged Hannah tightly before leaving. "You saved my son," she whispered. Hannah shook her head slightly. "Heat saved him." But that night, alone again inside the curved steel walls, she understood something deeper. She hadn't just built warmer shelter. She had built proof that resilience didn't require permission. Spring arrived slowly, melting snow into streams across the basin. Deputy Ellison returned one afternoon with papers in hand. "The county wants to fund workshops," he said. "You'd lead them." Hannah stared at the documents. Grants, materials, training sessions. "You turned a surplus shell into something smarter than half the housing in this region," he added. "People need that." She looked up at the twin chimneys rising from her hut, smoke drifting steady and controlled into clear blue sky. Last winter, she had nearly died in silence. This winter, she had kept 11 people alive and measured temperatures that proved it. 38 degrees warmer than her old shack in identical cold. She signed the papers. By the following winter, 3 new Quonset huts with dual chimney systems stood across the basin. Then 6, then 12. The design evolved with shared improvements, but the principle remained. Curved steel, trapped air, balanced heat, controlled draft. On the coldest night of the next January, the thermometer outside Hannah's hut read -18 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, it held steady at 62 degrees Fahrenheit. She stood beneath the arc of her ceiling, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching smoke rise clean and confident from both chimneys. The storm still came sideways. The wind still howled. But inside the steel curve she built with blistered hands and stubborn resolve, winter no longer had the final word.